You found just stories, simple, heartfelt moments from real lives, stories that remind us how connected we all are through love, loss, and hope. Get cozy. The stories are about to begin. Sarah hurried down the long hospital corridor, painted a sterile white. She needed to finish the paperwork quickly. The schedule for today included two difficult operations, and one of them was for a small patient whose relatives were closely connected to her past. This past was something she wished she could erase from memory, as it held too much pain, injustice, fear, and resentment. It seemed this chapter of her life was closed forever. She had built a new life where nothing reminded her of her youth. However, quite recently, the past had reminded her of itself again. But the meeting turned out to be completely different. Those very people were sitting in her office. It was as if Sarah had been doused with ice water. She recognized them instantly, although many years had passed since that day when, as a very young girl with a light backpack on her shoulders, she had almost run away from home. They had both changed, but it was impossible not to recognize them. The conversation was long and difficult. They weren't looking for reasons for reproach, although there were plenty. It was simply that a great misfortune had befallen them. Here, you couldn't help but believe in the boomerang of fate. As often happens, it also affected a completely innocent person, a very small one. And it was this small person, a little girl, who needed help. Sarah, an experienced doctor, had encountered similar cases and knew what to do. That night after the visit, she couldn't sleep for a long time. Her children had long been sleeping soundly in their rooms. Her husband was breathing peacefully beside her, also deep in sleep. Sarah tossed and turned, involuntarily sinking into memories. Scenes from the past came alive before her eyes, like frames from an old film, and she couldn't stop them. Sarah barely remembered her mother. She only knew that she had existed. But she was only 4 years old when the dearest person in her life was gone. Her father told her about her mother, although he didn't like to recall his first wife, partly because it caused him pain. As she grew older, Sarah noticed the sadness in his eyes when her mother was mentioned. But Carol appeared in their lives, a woman who came into the house when Sarah was 7 and immediately took the place of the mistress. Her stepmother couldn't stand any mention of her predecessor, so her father remained silent, not wanting to upset his new wife unnecessarily. Sarah also had another relative, her mother's cousin, Aunt Helen, but she lived in another city. Since childhood, Sarah had visited her for a week or two during holidays, and even earlier, before Helen moved away, niece and aunt saw each other much more often. It was a happy time. Aunt Helen took the girl to theaters and museums. They walked, talked, and laughed. Aunt Helen's son, Andrew, already a high school student, helped his younger cousin with math, carried her around the city on his strong shoulders, and sometimes took her with him on walks. All his friends, especially the girls, were very fond of Sarah. It was wonderful. But Carol felt a strong aversion to Aunt Helen. Even the very young Sarah understood this then. Her stepmother spoke ill of her, with clear disdain. Aunt Helen was not welcome in Sarah's house, and this upset and surprised the girl. How could anyone not love Aunt Helen? She was so kind, good, and cheerful. Aunt Helen often told Sarah about her mother, mostly interesting stories from their shared childhood and youth. The cousins were very close friends. Together they had been through so much, good and bad, fun and dangerous. Aunt Helen sincerely admired Elizabeth, and Sarah simply adored listening to these stories and looking at photographs that preserved the memory of the dearest person to her, whom she barely remembered. "How your mother rejoiced at your birth!" Aunt Helen smiled, looking at Sarah. "She was simply flying on wings. We made all sorts of plans together on how we would raise you, develop you, educate you. You had such tiny fingers, thin, somehow skillful. Your mother always dreamed that you would become a surgeon, that you would save people. She had a weak heart since childhood, a complex defect, and no one could cure her. Well, she wanted her daughter to help people like herself, to make them healthy and happy. By the way, Sarah also noticed that Aunt Helen herself had a very poor opinion of Carol, and of her father too. No, the aunt didn't say anything like that. The girl saw it in the change in Helen's voice, in the expression in her eyes. Sarah worried then. Why couldn't the adults who meant so much to her stand each other, barely restraining themselves when they met to avoid saying nasty things to each other? Carol constantly found reasons for dissatisfaction. Either Sarah was returned home at the wrong time, or she wasn't dressed properly for a walk, or she hadn't learned all the lessons assigned for the holidays. There were always complaints. In short, it somehow happened unnoticed that Sarah visited Aunt Helen less and less often, and then some scandal occurred between the adults, and communication with Helen ceased altogether. Aunt Helen called only once more after that argument. Carol graciously allowed them to talk. "Sweetheart, don't think I'm abandoning you," Aunt Helen said. "It's just how circumstances are. You won't understand yet. You're little. You know my address. If anything happens, be sure to come. I'll help you in a difficult time. Remember this, you can always count on me." And that was it. That was their last conversation. After that, it was as if a line had been drawn. Carol said that Aunt Helen had her own affairs, that her son was entering university, that she had problems with work, and didn't have time for her niece. But Sarah understood everything. She heard Aunt Helen call the home number, but Carol picked up and spoke to her rudely, not calling Sarah to the phone. One day Sarah saw Aunt Helen from the car window. She was standing in their yard. She waved to her, but Carol distracted her, and the car sped away, leaving Aunt Helen behind. Apparently she was trying to meet her niece, and it wasn't easy, as she lived in another city and had to leave her affairs to come here. But her father and stepmother shielded Sarah from communicating with Aunt Helen in every way. They were both united in their dislike for Aunt Helen. It was hard for Sarah at first without contact with her beloved Aunt Helen, the only one who supported and understood her. At home, however, things were far from rosy. Her father and stepmother had a daughter, Chloe. At first, Sarah was even happy. An adorable little one, a baby sister. But the joy was short-lived. Firstly, Sarah suddenly saw how tender and loving parents could be towards a certain child. Her father worked a lot, so he couldn't give his daughter the attention she wanted. He would sometimes ask, "How are things at school? How are you feeling?" But it was clear that her answers didn't interest him much. And when Sarah asked him to play with her, to give her a piggyback ride like Andrew, Aunt Helen's son, often did, to go for a walk in the park, even to kick a football around, he would brush her off, and his gaze was absent, as if while talking to his daughter, he was thinking about something else. Carol here annoyed Sarah even more. The girl tried to behave perfectly to earn her favor. She did her homework, cleaned up after herself, played quietly and unobtrusively. But Carol always found something to scold her stepdaughter for. This wasn't right. That wasn't right. And again, Carol's gaze, on an annoying nuisance. It was impossible not to notice. And yet the girl had been so drawn to her at first. She wanted what other girls had. Walks with her stepmother to the shops, heart-to-heart talks, cooking together. But Carol avoided such interaction in every way. However, she did fulfill her parental duties. No one from the outside could accuse Carol of not looking after the girl properly. And then Chloe was born, and Sarah saw her father and Carol from a completely different perspective and realized that they could be like that too. Loving, caring, attentive. Just not with her, but with Chloe. Chloe's smile, her cooing, her first little skills, all this filled the baby's parents with delight. They could spend a long time admiring their little daughter playing in her playpen or even just sleeping. They stood over the crib so happy, exchanging glances. Even with their last money, they threw lavish birthday parties for Chloe, buying her the very best of everything. Sarah, on the other hand, got things on a residual basis. The slightest successes of her younger sister were elevated to the rank of genius, while Sarah, no matter how hard she tried, couldn't earn even a little praise. She studied very well, was a diligent student with excellent grades, but this was taken for granted. It was precisely this contrast that was painful. No, Sarah didn't envy her sister's dolls and outfits, After all, she herself was clothed. It was something else entirely. Chloe's parents always listened to her with genuine interest. They enjoyed spending time with her. They often delighted in her answers. As for Sarah, she felt like an outsider in this family, completely estranged. Her father still sometimes tried to talk to his elder daughter, supposedly heart to heart. It was clear that he was making an effort, and in reality, he wasn't particularly interested in hearing about Sarah's life. Carol here annoyed her stepdaughter even more, and over the years, the woman almost stopped hiding it. Later, Sarah guessed that it was Carol who turned her father against her, telling him only bad things about her, portraying her stepdaughter in a bad light to her husband. She did all this with great finesse and skill. Her husband didn't even suspect his wife's motives, especially since he was almost never home anyway. He worked a lot. He was even grateful to his new wife for helping him, raising, nurturing, and cherishing his child. Her father worked shifts, and Sarah lived for months only with Carol and Chloe, feeling like a stranger in her own apartment. Sarah gradually acquired many responsibilities. She had to clean the rooms before Carol came home from work, and also go to the shop, cook dinner, and take Chloe to clubs and sections. 90% of the time, she was too young to get to her developmental classes on her own, so Sarah accompanied her, who also had many household duties, not to mention homework. They were assigned a lot in high school. Sarah was used to doing everything conscientiously, so she stayed up late, with little time left for rest. Sarah tried to reason with Carol, to explain to her stepmother that it was very difficult for her to live under such a regime. Of course, it brought no results. "You're just lazy," sighed Carol, "like most teenagers nowadays. But we, as parents, are responsible for your upbringing and are trying for your own good." It was useless to approach her father at all. He had been subtly influenced by Carol, and was even grateful to her for raising his daughter so well, instilling a love for work and reasonable strictness. Her father sincerely believed that Carol was to be thanked for Sarah not hanging around in yards with other teenagers, not drinking beer on benches with them, not smoking. "You'll appreciate it later," he explained to his elder daughter when she tried to talk about her dreams. "You, because of your age, simply don't understand what Carol is doing for you. She's preparing you for adult life." For adult life? Sarah wanted to cry from resentment then. She wasn't a little girl anymore and knew what she wanted to become. A surgeon, preferably a cardiac surgeon, to learn how to treat those whom others had given up on. But it wasn't easy to get into medical academy. It would be good to attend preparatory courses at the university. Sarah talked to her parents, trying to convey to them how important these courses were to her. "But we're not doing very well with money right now," Carol shook her head. "And these courses of yours are expensive. We can't afford them. And anyway, maybe you won't even need it. Today you want to be a doctor, tomorrow a ballerina, now this, and we have to pay for these whims when we're already short on money." And that was the pure truth. Her father had some problems at work. His salary decreased significantly and was often delayed. The family lived on previously saved money, but money for Chloe's developmental classes was always found. They celebrated birthdays, bought dresses, and treats. The parents economized on everything except their adored younger daughter. And it was already difficult to forbid Chloe anything. At the slightest thing, there were tears, tantrums, scandals, disgusting scenes with snot smeared on her cheeks and tiny feet stomping. Her father at such moments called Chloe his princess and hugged her close. Carol also doted on her. The little princess's every wish was immediately fulfilled. The parents couldn't bear to see her cry, couldn't refuse her anything. She wasn't Sarah after all. When the elder daughter tried to explain to her stepmother and father how she saw the whole situation, she ended up being blamed. "You don't understand that she's a child," her father said sternly. "A small child who doesn't understand financial problems yet. The little one should have a happy childhood." "It's all your spoiled nature and innate selfishness," Carol said, pursing her lips and looking at Sarah. "You're so grown up, but you don't understand anything. It's your jealousy, too, pathological. No, we missed something in your upbringing somewhere." Every time Sarah tried to talk about something with her stepmother or father, she ended up being blamed, feeling misunderstood and rejected. Of course, no one paid for the medical academy preparatory courses. The girl's wish was considered a whim, and she was advised to study better. How much better could she study? She already had straight A's, despite the excessive household workload. By the way, Carol also considered Sarah's academic success her own achievement, since it was she who had instilled a love for work in Sarah. It was the graduation year. Just a little more, and Sarah would finish school. She still hoped to get into medical academy. They hadn't paid for the courses, so the girl prepared herself. Fortunately, there was a lot of free literature online. Money was still tight in the family, but things seemed to be starting to improve. Her father found a new job, though, again, it involved long business trips. He had gone on shifts before, but now he disappeared for 3 to 4 months at a time. On the other hand, the salary promised to be more than decent. Carol was happy about this. Chloe started school. Now Sarah had another duty, helping her sister with homework. It wasn't easy. Firstly, Chloe had grown into a very capricious girl. At the slightest thing, she would burst into tears. The smallest difficulties caused her hysterics. She cried, complained to her mother, who felt sorry for her, and asked Sarah to be gentler with the little one. How much gentler could she be? Secondly, Chloe, well, how to put it, found academics difficult, and she was also restless. In short, Sarah sweated buckets before her sister's homework was finished, and only then would the girl start on her own assignments and again sit up late into the night, almost falling asleep during lessons at school in the morning. From Carol, Sarah still saw only reproaches and complaints. Despite the fact that the girl did so much for her stepmother, helping around the house, raising Chloe, she saw no gratitude from Carol. She continued to perceive her stepdaughter as a nuisance, without whom everyone would be better off. And now Sarah had also grown up, become smarter, and started to understand a lot. This drove Carol even more insane. The stepmother didn't hide that she dreamed of the day when Sarah would embark on her own journey, fly out of the nest. She told her husband that life would improve and be completely different after their elder daughter grew up. That is, even her father perceived Sarah as some kind of annoying nuisance. Sometimes the girl shared her experiences with her classmate Jessica. She was quiet and intelligent, even wise, despite her young age. The girl herself was young, but her soul seemed old, having seen a lot. Your stepmother is a typical stepmother. Jessica shook her head, listening to Sarah. But it's okay. Life is like that. It will put everything in its place, you'll see. You'll remember my words. And you yourself will endure. And everything will be wonderful for you with such a strong core. Her classmates' words were encouraging, instilling hope for a bright future and giving her the strength to live. Sarah didn't give up on her dream. She wanted to be a surgeon and did a lot for it. And she knew, after finishing school, she would take her documents to the medical academy. The academy was located in their city, just 3 stops from home, within walking distance. An old building in the heart of the city. The girl often walked past it among the young men and women, hurrying to this temple of science for classes. It was her dream. But now Sarah held her diploma, red, of special distinction, and even a gold medal, a mark of excellence. Sarah was happy and very pleased with herself. She didn't go to the graduation party. Carol said they didn't have the money for it yet. But Sarah herself wasn't very eager to go to that restaurant anyway, and was barely disappointed. Well, said Carol on the evening of the diploma ceremony. Her father, as usual, was on a business trip. Now you're an adult. You're almost 18. We've raised you all these years, given you everything. Clothes, food, a roof over your head. The time has come for you to fly out of the parental nest. Where? Sarah didn't understand. Where else? To work, of course. What studying? Sarah, just drop these silly fantasies. Stop dreaming of the impossible. Medical academy? Do you know the competition there? I checked. 12 people per place. You won't get in. Don't even dream about it. I've been preparing and I feel capable. That's just your overconfidence talking. You'll never get into a university like that. Something simpler, of course, is within your reach. But think, that's another 5 years of studying, and you need to work. I need to study. Sarah looked at her medal. I'm good at it. School is one thing. Carol started to get angry, but for now, she still tried to hide it. But this is university. In school, they gave you grades for effort. In university, you'll have to study for real. There won't be time for anything else. And you're already an adult. You should support yourself. Especially since we're short on money right now. Supporting a grown girl for several more years is an excessive burden for us. I'll talk to your father about this. I've already talked to him, and he completely agrees with me. Sarah, you shouldn't waste years on studying. It's nonsense in our situation. Then people with those same diplomas stand at cash registers alongside those who didn't finish university. I know that much. Carol herself worked as a cashier. She had an unfinished law college degree, and she often spoke with a kind of malicious pleasure about her cashier colleagues with economics and law degrees. You just don't know life yet, she enlightened her stepdaughter. No universities, no courses, no buts. I've already arranged it. A friend of mine is the chief accountant at a homeowners association, and they need a janitor. It's not bad for a start. The most important thing is that they provide their employees with housing for next to nothing from the reserve fund. So you can move out tomorrow and start your own life. And then Sarah got angry. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to speak to her stepmother like this. You have no right to dictate my fate. I will be a surgeon, absolutely. It's my dream, and you are no longer my boss. You've humiliated me my whole life. Do you think I don't see and understand anything? Sarah was truly worked up. She had never spoken to her parents like this. She simply hadn't dared. But here, all the resentment accumulated over the years seemed to burst out. The girl shouted about her feelings, about the injustice, and strangely enough, it made her feel better. She understood that after this, everything would change. Oh, you ungrateful wretch! Carol looked at her stepdaughter with undisguised hatred. Get out of here if you're so smart and independent. This is my home, too, Sarah calmly reminded her. Mine and Father's. You have no right to kick me out, but I'll leave myself with pleasure. She started packing. She didn't take much. Money, documents, clothes for the first few days. She ended up with a small, light backpack, just right. Sarah knew where to go, although she couldn't have guessed what awaited her there. After all, she hadn't communicated with Aunt Helen for so many years. But something told her. She would be welcome in Helen's house and would be met just as she was in childhood, supported, helped, comforted, and given the strength to fulfill her dream. She should have gone there long ago, instead of enduring the torment. She left the apartment without looking back. Carol didn't even turn around. Sarah had no doubt. Of course, she would tell her father and portray her as always, rude, ungrateful, almost a criminal. Her father would believe her. He believed every word his wife said. It was easier, more convenient for him that way. Well, it was time to admit that even her own father didn't understand or accept his daughter. He had made his choice. Nothing connected Sarah to this family anymore. Well, except for the shared inheritance, of course, but it was much, much too early to think about that. The waiting room. She bought a ticket to the city where Aunt Helen lived easily without any problems. The intercity bus was due to depart in half an hour. Sarah considered this luck a good sign and smiled. Although she was trembling from the emotions and anxiety she had experienced, the girl was almost certain. Her story would end well, and now, right now, she was taking an important and correct step. Aunt Helen was surprised to see her niece on the doorstep, but she recognized her immediately, although the relatives hadn't seen each other since Sarah was about 10 years old. They hugged. Finding herself in the arms of a loved one, the girl finally let herself go. She burst into tears. Then they drank tea in the kitchen, talking. Sarah told her about her life. Aunt Helen listened, shaking her head and sighing at her niece. Listen, she said when Sarah had finished. You'll stay and live with me. There's a medical academy in our city too. If you don't get in now, you can prepare for a year, and then they'll definitely take you next year. I'd really like to, but Father, what if he doesn't allow it? You'll be 18 in a week. You can choose where to live yourself, Aunt Helen reminded her. I won't let you go back there. I didn't realize you were having such a hard time there. If I had known, I would have taken you through the court long ago." Aunt Helen told her about how Carol had forbidden her from communicating with Sarah and had even turned her father against her. But that wasn't difficult. He's been under her thumb for a long time. She convinced him that I was a bad influence on you, that I was saying bad things about them. And I called you often and even came to see you. But they wouldn't let me in, wouldn't even let me see you, and the gifts I bought for you were returned to me. I followed your life on social media. Sometimes Carol posted photos where you appeared, sometimes your father did. But I never found your page. I thought we could at least communicate through messengers, but no. They didn't allow it. They didn't allow me to create social media accounts when I was a teenager. They said it took up too much time. And children shouldn't be on the internet. There are many scammers there. And then when I got older, I didn't feel like it myself. Maybe your parents were afraid that I would maintain contact with you, Aunt Helen mused. Hence the prohibitions. And why? Why did they always treat you so badly? Well, there is a reason, Aunt Helen smiled mysteriously. You're grown up now. I'll tell you the story. And then you'll understand everything. Elizabeth and Helen were cousins, more than sisters, the best of friends. They stayed at each other's houses constantly, went to school together, hung out. Later, as they got older, they went dancing. Elizabeth and Helen had no secrets from each other. They shared their most intimate thoughts. Elizabeth had a weak heart since childhood. She was often in the hospital. Helen would rush to her immediately after school, to her best friend. The doctors recognized her and always let her in, even if it wasn't visiting hours. The adults, observing the sisters' friendship, joked, "You'll fall in love with the same guy, and that will be the end of your friendship." The girls declared in unison that this would never happen, and it didn't. Helen was the first to get married, to a guy she met at university, tall, handsome, smart, kind. Elizabeth approved of her sister's choice. "You'll be happy with him." They were indeed happy, though not for long. Helen soon became a young widow. Her husband drowned while saving 2 teenagers at the city beach. He pushed the boys out, but he himself. Helen was a very young mother at the time. Her son, Andrew, had just turned 2. Of course, Elizabeth was by the side of the inconsolable Helen during this difficult time. She even stayed at her sister's apartment for a while, looking after her and little Andrew, trying to rouse her, somehow distract her. Time passed. Helen slowly but surely began to recover. Life seemed to settle down, stabilize. Of course, she grieved for her husband, but she finally remembered herself. Elizabeth was happy for her sister, as she had been seriously worried about her condition for a long time. Then Elizabeth also married Michael, a man slightly older than her, serious, deliberate. He earned well, though he had to work hard, which couldn't help but earn Helen's respect. Elizabeth's chosen one didn't exactly displease Helen. She just didn't understand what could have attracted her sister to him. They seemed to be molded from different clay. Michael wasn't very talkative, even stern, and didn't understand their jokes, and Helen considered this a serious drawback. "You see, next to him I feel," Elizabeth tried to explain, "like I'm behind a stone wall." And Helen understood. Elizabeth, her beloved sister, had been orphaned early. Perhaps she needed a reliable shoulder to lean on, and Michael, he was precisely that kind of person. Immediately after the wedding, Michael bought a large apartment in a prestigious area of the city. It turned out he had savings, plus his work decided to help a valuable employee. Elizabeth enthusiastically started furnishing the new home. They went shopping, choosing curtains, chandeliers, and other important interior elements. It was exciting and pleasant. Soon a child appeared in the young family, a girl, Sarah. Helen's son, Andrew, was already quite grown up, almost a teenager. By the way, this wonderful little one might not have existed at all. The doctors advised Elizabeth against having a child. Her heart was weak, and it was unknown how her body would react. But Elizabeth believed that a family without a child was not a family. And her husband, Michael, dreamed of heirs. Well, they decided to go for it. The pregnancy went perfectly, despite the doctor's fears. The girl was born healthy and strong. It seemed everything had turned out wonderfully, but not entirely. A year after giving birth, Elizabeth's condition began to worsen. The strain on her not-so-healthy body took its toll. But Elizabeth regretted nothing. She followed the doctor's recommendations, had timely checkups, and took her pills. In short, she took care of her health and tried not to get nervous. Doctors say that with my condition, the most important thing is positive emotions and no stress. Well, you have positive emotions in abundance, Helen smiled, looking at her sweet, funny niece. That's for sure, and I have no stress either. Everything is fine in our family. Helen hoped that over time she would get to know Michael better, become friends with him. After all, he wasn't a stranger, her beloved sister's husband. But he remained just as distant and silent. He would come home and, finding Helen visiting, greet her dryly and go into the bedroom. Does he not like me? Helen asked Elizabeth. No, of course not. He's just that kind of person. And he has a lot of work lately. He gets tired. He's rarely home. Constant delays. Business trips. What can you do? It's a managerial position. But we and our daughter lack nothing. And otherwise, he's good, kind, takes care of us, denies us nothing. But Helen knew her sister perfectly and saw that Elizabeth was being a little disingenuous. It seemed she herself was upset. Something was wrong. Another year and a half passed. Sarah had grown up and even started going to kindergarten, and Elizabeth was constantly in hospitals, less often at home. She had to visit doctors more often than ordinary people and carefully monitor her condition. Michael provided for the family but spent very little time with his daughter and wife, constantly traveling on business trips, staying late at the office. And at home, he was distant, which Elizabeth explained away as her husband's fatigue in her sister's eyes, or perhaps even in her own. But Helen saw. She understood. Something wasn't right. She felt sorry for her sister. And one day Helen saw her suspicions confirmed with her own eyes. Yes, Michael was indeed cheating on her. That day she got a call from school saying Andrew had a fever and had been sent home. The anxious mother asked her boss for time off. You never know. Maybe her son needed help. His condition was unclear. That's why she was running through the train station at that moment. It was a shortcut home, and she saw them. Michael and his companion. Beautiful, slim, tall, fashionable, with a model-like appearance, as they said back then. They were coming out of the waiting room. He was pulling both suitcases, his and hers, and Michael was completely different from how Helen was used to seeing him. Enthusiastic, eyes shining, mouth never closing, a smile constantly on his face. He looked at his companion with something like adoration, and she seemed to allow herself to be admired. And Helen stopped, watching the couple walk away. A couple of times Michael put his arm around the young woman's waist, pulling her close to whisper something in her ear, and even kissed her once, passionately and quickly, because she almost immediately playfully pushed him away. In short, there was no doubt left. And this was despite Elizabeth saying that her husband had gone on another business trip. But the train that had just arrived at the station was a direct route from Sochi. Apparently, Michael and the beauty hadn't gone on a business trip, but to a resort to relax. Helen even stamped her foot in annoyance. The doctors had advised Elizabeth to breathe the sea air, but Michael said he didn't have the time, but to relax with his mistress. That was fine. Helen thought for a long time about whether to tell Elizabeth. On the one hand, her husband was deceiving her, and Helen herself would have preferred to know such things, however incredibly bitter the truth might be. But Elizabeth, she had a weak heart, and doctors recommended avoiding stress. Wouldn't the news be too much for her? In short, Helen decided not to worry Elizabeth, and instead talk frankly with Michael. For this important conversation, the woman went to her sister's husband's workplace. Michael's office was located in the city center. Michael was surprised to see his wife's sister on the threshold of his office. Has something happened? He asked. Something has happened, Helen replied grimly, and sat down opposite Michael without being invited, pulling a chair up to the desk. And the woman told Michael about what she had seen at the station, in detail, without omitting anything. Michael listened calmly, without even raising an eyebrow. And then, well, yes, I have a woman. We have real feelings for each other. I have to meet her. Well, secretly. I'm not thrilled about it myself. But why? Why? Well, sometimes it happens. Feelings cool down. I thought Elizabeth was the one, the only one. I was mistaken. Carol, with her, everything is different, completely. I would have told my wife long ago, but you know, her heart is weak. Elizabeth's condition is unstable right now. Doctors say it's another crisis. When it passes, I'll confess everything. We'll get a divorce. I'll help her get settled in life. Don't worry about that. But telling her about Carol now is like sending her to the grave. You understand that, don't you? Helen thought. Of course, Michael was right. 100% right. He was, of course, a scoundrel and a traitor for having an affair with this Carol while married. But in his own way, he was protecting his wife, the mother of his child, from the strongest stress, which could have a very detrimental effect on her condition. In short, they agreed with Michael to keep quiet for now. It was indeed much better for everyone involved in this story. For everyone except Carol herself, though she weakly believed this. At one fine moment, Helen still remembered that late evening in detail. It was almost night. Andrew was sleeping in his room. He had to get up early for school. Helen was also about to go to bed but couldn't tear herself away from her favorite TV series. And then the phone rang. Anxiety immediately gripped the woman's heart. She felt something was wrong. It was too late for a casual chat. "Who are you related to Elizabeth Miller?" a strange male voice asked on the phone. "Her sister," Helen replied, turning cold with horror. She still hoped that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. "You need to come and pick up the child. Her husband is on a business trip and the daughter is too young to be left alone." "What's wrong with Elizabeth?" "You need to come," the voice repeated, "and as soon as possible." Of course, Helen called a taxi and was at her sister's apartment about 15 minutes later. There was something... too many people. Doctors. Police. They spoke to Helen and told her everything. She literally slid down the wall to the floor, sitting right on the cold laminate, covering her face with her hands. Elizabeth had had an attack. She died instantly, but the doctors didn't make it in time. A small, bewildered Sarah approached Helen. Fear and incomprehension were in the girl's eyes. Looking at her, Helen understood. She had to pull herself together. She was needed by her niece. "Will you take the child?" the man in uniform inquired. "Of course," Helen nodded. "Of course I'll take her." And Sarah did indeed spend almost a month at Helen's place. Michael was sorting out some work matters. He now had to look after his daughter. What business trips could there be? He was looking for a nanny. All this time, Sarah lived with Helen. Andrew helped his mother look after the little one, and did so with great pleasure. And then Sarah's father took her away, promising with his characteristic seriousness to visit her. "Can I come and visit her?" Helen asked. "You should. I've made you keys to the apartment. Come whenever you want. Sarah is so drawn to you." "Okay. Can I ask you something?" "I think I even know what about," Michael nodded. "You want to know if I told Elizabeth about Carol? You're suggesting that's why the attack happened?" "Yes." "Of course I didn't tell her anything." Michael looked at Sarah with a direct, sincere gaze. "I would never, under any circumstances, have done that. We talked about it, remember? I knew it was dangerous for Elizabeth, such truth." Helen believed him. And then, several months after the tragedy, Helen found something among her sister's belongings. Sarah was truly happy that day. She didn't leave her aunt's side for a step. When Elizabeth was visiting them, niece and aunt decided to play dress-up. It was fun. The 4-year-old loved to dress up and transform, and Helen, she admitted, did too. Both of them enjoyed the game, and they even put on music. Helen opened her sister's wardrobe. Her heart tightened as usual at the sight of Elizabeth's things, which she would never need again. They had chosen this blouse together, and Elizabeth was wearing this skirt when they went to the cinema for the last time, not knowing then, of course, that it was the last time. Helen sighed and tried to reach for a hat on the top shelf. The hat caught on something. She reached out, and a pile of things tumbled down, right onto Helen. They were hats, scarves, and several photographs neatly tied with a ribbon. Helen bent down to pick up the pictures and froze. The photographs showed Michael and Carol hugging and kissing. One picture looked particularly romantic, Michael and Carol against the backdrop of a stunningly beautiful sea sunset, tanned, clearly in love. So that was it. Elizabeth found out after all. Perhaps that's why the attack happened. Helen turned over one of the photos. There was an inscription, apparently made with a lip pencil. "Let him go. He doesn't love you anymore. He's only with you because of your daughter. He won't leave because you're sick. So make the first move." Terrible text. Hurtful words. Helen imagined what it must have been like for her sister to suddenly receive this message and the note on the back of one of the pictures. She called Michael, who behaved very strangely. "Why are you doing this? I've already lost my wife. I haven't gotten over that grief yet. And now you're setting Carol up too. What do you want? I understand you're upset that Elizabeth is gone. Maybe that's why you don't want me to be happy either. And that's why you staged this farce?" "Are you serious? Where would I get these photos from? You don't understand anything at all. Your woman deliberately sent Elizabeth to her grave. She's a terrible person. She did it." But Michael stuck to his line, and Helen understood. Carol, this attractive, slim woman, had enormous influence over him, which is why he believed her. Cunning, cold, and deceitful. Helen had no doubt. Carol had latched onto Michael only because of his apartment and also his position and decent income. She had a goal, and she achieved it. She destroyed her main rival. Maybe she didn't want her death, but the tragedy certainly benefited her. Before, they didn't talk much, and now, not at all. Helen saw Sarah often. Usually she took the girl for the weekend. Michael still worked a lot. It seemed that now nothing prevented the widower and his mistress from finding personal happiness. But for some reason, the man was not in a hurry to bring Carol home to his daughter. They met on neutral territory, lived together on vacation, but in ordinary life, they lived separately. And only about 3 years after the tragedy did Michael propose to his mistress and bring her home to his daughter. Sarah was already in the 1st grade by then. And from then on, as Carol became Michael's legal wife, Helen was gradually discouraged from visiting the house. Helen, by the way, had moved to another city by then, bought a larger apartment there, and found a good job. She even thought about taking Sarah permanently because, well, why would Michael need her in his new family? She wanted to become her niece's guardian, so she improved her living conditions to ensure there would be no obstacles. But unexpectedly, Michael stated that he would raise his daughter himself. This was strange. He had never shown particular love or affection for the girl, nor had he looked after her. He had simply hired a nanny after his wife died. They gradually cut off our communication. Helen looked at her now adult niece. It wasn't difficult, considering I now lived in another city. Carol, she tried in every way to shield you from me, because she knew perfectly well. I know everything. I know what she did to Elizabeth. And probably she was afraid that I would tell you everything, that I would somehow prove my point to Michael, and he would kick her out. In short, it was understandable that she was uncomfortable having someone like me nearby who knew all her secrets, so they pushed me away. And I tried. I tried to see you. But they were the parents, the legal guardians, and I essentially had no rights to communicate with you. And I thought Carol appeared later, well, after Mom was gone. Maybe they delayed the wedding so that you would think that later, when you grew up. No. Carol was in your father's life before the tragedy, and most likely, she was the reason for what happened to your mother. I was scared to leave you with such a person, but what could I do? And I watched over you from afar. From the outside, everything looked fine. You wouldn't even think that you had such a hard time there. What a person she is. She didn't even spare a child. I won't go back to them. Of course you won't. You're almost 18 now. You can decide for yourself where to live. Tomorrow we'll go to the university together and find out what you need for admission. Did you bring your documents with you? Yes, I didn't have time to pack many things. That's nonsense. We'll buy everything tomorrow. The main thing is the documents. Carol stood by the coffee machine, waiting for hot chocolate. She was incredibly sleepy. Little Sophie had been restless all night again. Sometimes she had trouble breathing. Sometimes her chest hurt. Her granddaughter's illness, Carol's most precious treasure, was progressing. The girl couldn't play with friends, couldn't even go to kindergarten. Her daughter, Chloe, she was clearly not ready for such difficulties as a sick child. She got hysterical, capricious, and even angry at her daughter, who was not at fault at all. It was Chloe and her useless boyfriend who had made a baby in a drunken stupor. And later, during the pregnancy, the future young mother didn't restrain herself much. She smoked and indulged in beer. Carol tried to keep an eye on her daughter, but it was impossible to watch an adult 24/7. People were right. They had indeed spoiled Chloe. And yet Carol just wanted her daughter to be happy. Numerous developmental classes, gifts, surprises, birthdays. Carol invested all her available resources in her child. Chloe had no household chores because her mother believed that her girl would have enough time to work in life later. Michael. He didn't interfere much in the upbringing of his younger daughter, completely trusting his wife with this matter. And anyway, he was always away from home, earning money to support the family. Carol was completely confident. You couldn't spoil a child with love. Childhood whims would pass with age, and her daughter would grow up to be a strong, self-respecting person. Only Chloe, at one point, completely stopped studying because she was used to doing only what she wanted. She dropped out of school in 10th grade, declared that she would never go to university, not even to a commercial faculty where almost everyone was accepted if they just paid, because she was tired of studying and finally wanted to enjoy life to the fullest. Chloe got involved with a bad crowd and often came home drunk in the early morning. Carol could do nothing with her wayward daughter. Neither could Michael. He didn't know how to behave with Chloe at all. He had never really been involved in her upbringing, although he loved her very much. He transferred money and gave her gifts. And then something terrible happened. Michael was in a car accident on the highway while driving home from another business trip, and so Carol was left alone. However, she was quick to act, and Michael's apartment and accounts went solely to her and Chloe. Registering this property cost a lot of money and effort, but now it had paid off in full. Sarah, on the other hand, she had long lived in another city, far away, a lost cause. Carol wasn't particularly interested in her fate. Neither was Michael. They only knew that Sarah had, after all, gotten into medical school, as she had dreamed. That was all the information they had. Sarah didn't maintain contact with her parents. She probably communicated with her aunt, with Helen, and that was fine. Carol was quite satisfied with that. The main thing was that Michael's apartment and money in his accounts went only to them. And then Chloe got pregnant by one of her perpetually drunk admirers, and so Sophie was born, weak, pale. In the maternity hospital, she was diagnosed with a serious heart defect, one with which people live at best until 7 to 8 years old if an operation isn't performed. And Sophie is already 5. Of course, Carol put all her efforts into her granddaughter's rehabilitation and treatment. She herself was surprised by the strength of the feelings she felt for the little one. She had once dreamed that this money would provide them with a happy life without deprivation and saving. But it turned out differently. Everything went towards Sophie's rather expensive supportive treatment. The girl had undergone several operations. This had only slightly improved the situation but hadn't fundamentally solved the problem. It was scary to think about what could happen to her granddaughter. Even Chloe, usually carefree, frivolous, and thinking only of herself, even she seemed to understand that the jokes were over and tried to care for her daughter as much as possible. But the main burden of care still lay on Carol's shoulders. In the city, everyone refused further treatment for Sophie. There were no such facilities or necessary specialists here. So Carol, Chloe, and Sophie went to Moscow. They were advised to go to a children's surgery center where it seemed almost like wizards worked, helping even in the most severe cases. Getting an appointment was difficult. The queue was long, but Carol managed to get through. However, at the appointment, they were disheartened. The queue was huge because people were coming from all over the country, and most patients were in situations similar to Sophie's, which couldn't be delayed. No one could be moved up, and by that time, the girl's condition could very well worsen to the point where no one would take her to the operating table. They prescribed medication therapy for the little one for now, but no one could say if it would help. Carol drank her hot chocolate, leaning her back against the light hospital wall. Nearby, on a couch, sat a bewildered Chloe, with Sophie sleeping on her lap, unaware of how serious everything was. And Carol could barely hold back tears of helplessness and despair. There was nothing more she could do. And suddenly, "Oh, Miller, dear," one orderly said to another. Everyone had given up on him. His heart was full of holes. Well, that's what the doctor said. Hopeless. But she performed the operation at night in her free time, spent 5 hours at the table, and saved the boy. He'll live now, and he'll be completely healthy. Miller is a pediatric cardiac surgeon from God. The other orderly nodded in agreement. And a good person, too. If only there were more people like her in the world. "Excuse me, where is Dr. Sarah Miller's office?" Carol rushed over to the orderlies and asked them to show her to the doctor's office. She was almost certain. No, it seemed too fantastic, but still. Sarah was finishing another report when a woman from the past suddenly appeared on the threshold of her office, the one who had once caused her so much pain and trouble, Carol. And beside her, holding a sleeping child, stood Chloe. Sarah recognized her sister too, although she had last seen her when she was still in elementary school. For some reason she felt fear, and also aversion, contempt, disgust, but also surprise, of course. And why? Why had the past sought her out at that moment when everything in her life had just settled down and stabilized? Carol began to speak. She cried, asked for forgiveness, and seemed genuinely remorseful for her behavior back then. "What happened? Maybe it's a boomerang, a punishment for how I treated you. But this child, a child who is not at fault for anything. You are our last hope, Sarah. Take her for the operation. Otherwise, she won't make it to her turn. You do this sometimes, I know. You take on difficult children in your non-working hours. I can't ask you for this after everything, but I am asking. I have no one else to turn to." Sarah looked at the little girl in her sister's arms, her niece as it turned out, and with surprise, she suddenly realized that she no longer felt resentment, and the aversion to these two people had also vanished somewhere. Before Sarah were people, unhappy, frightened people who needed help, and a child, a seriously ill child. Sarah asked for Sophie's documents. She needed to understand what they were dealing with. Carol readily pulled a thick folder from her bag. Test results, ultrasound reports, scans. Yes, the situation was indeed complex and couldn't wait. But Sarah knew she could handle it. She had dealt with such cases before. Of course, she would have to sacrifice her free time again. But that was such a small price compared to a child's life that it wasn't worth mentioning. Sarah had gone into medicine to save people after all. This was her calling, her dream. "Some tests will need to be redone," Sarah said, "and don't worry, everything will be all right.